Meanwhile, New York City demonstrating full scale that Trump was right. So you remember that time when there was a big argument over the Robert E. Lee statue in Charlottesville. It was the subject of that alt-right Unite the Right rally. And that ended, of course, in violence. And then there was this very controversial press conference where Trump seemed to quasi-downplay the evils of the white supremacists, but then walk it back, but then walk it back. And it was all a mess, right? But there was one thing Trump said during that press conference that was 100% right. And the left said this would never happen. He said, if you tear down the statues of Robert E. Lee, Jefferson's next. Washington's next. And a lot of the left, David Graham in The Atlantic, for example, were like, no. We're not going after the founders. That would be very silly. After all, there's a major distinction between people who actively fought to make the country not exist anymore as a country and people who established the country and who also participated in sins of their time. Okay, now, I agree. There's a major distinction between Robert E. Lee and George Washington, or between Robert E. Lee and Thomas Jefferson. But you know who doesn't agree? A large swath of the left, which believes that all of these people are inherently bad. They're evil, white slaveholders, and therefore, they must be torn down. And it doesn't matter if they established generalized principles which led to the foundation of the greatest republic in the history of mankind. Nope. All that matters is that they lived as people in their times and were involved in sins that were fairly common at the time. Doesn't mean that they weren't evil. Sin is sin. But it does mean that to pretend that we are building statues to Thomas Jefferson because of his treatment of Sally Hemings is idiotic. No one is building statues to Thomas Jefferson because of that. We're building statues to Thomas Jefferson because Thomas Jefferson was the author of the Declaration of Independence, because Thomas Jefferson helped negotiate the peace, because Thomas Jefferson was president of the United States, involved in the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, there are lots of reasons to build statues to Thomas Jefferson. Generally, when you build statues to a human, you're not doing so because you are greenlighting every element of what they believed, right? This is why we have Martin Luther King Day. Every Martin Luther King Day, there's an attempt by the left to sort of suggest that if you buy into Martin Luther King as a seminal figure in American history, this must be because you also endorse his socialistic view of economic redistribution. That's very silly. The reason that we celebrate Martin Luther King Day is because Martin Luther King was calling for a United States beyond race, for people to be judged as individuals, not as groups on the basis of skin color, right? That is the main takeaway. When you build a statue, you're looking for the main takeaway, not an endorsement of every aspect of anybody's life. Because on that basis, nobody should have a statue. There's a famous section of the Talmud where there's a discussion over whether it would be better for people to have been born or not been born. It's a big debate, right? It's a big philosophical debate. And one side says better for people to be born because they can perform commandments and they can fulfill God's will. And the other side's like, not better for man not to be born because human beings inherently sin and they sin an awful lot and they are bound to do more bad than good. And the Talmud comes down on the side that it would have been better for man not to be born. But since you are born, you better do some mitzvot, right? You better do some commandments. Okay, that is the view that you should have toward human nature and toward building statues of people. Okay, when it comes to building a statue of somebody, you're not building a statue to their sin. You're building a statue to the stuff that they did that was correct. Okay, but nobody seems to be able to make this particular distinction when it comes to the left, right? If you were a sinner, a grave sinner from 1790, this means the statue has to come down. Even if you were the author of the words that created the creed that were foundational to not only the creation of the United States, but also to the ending of slavery, to the civil rights movement. There's a reason that the words of Thomas Jefferson echo not through the slaveholding South, but echo through the free North. There's a reason that the words of the Declaration of Independence are invoked by people like Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington and Martin Luther King. There's a reason for that, but apparently not to the New York City Council, which has not only no historical perspective, but no philosophical understanding. According to the New York Times, for more than 100 years, a 7-foot-tall statue of Thomas Jefferson has towered over members of the New York City Council in their chamber at City Hall, a testament to his role as one of the nation's founding fathers and the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. But for the last 2 decades, some Black and Latino council members, citing Jefferson's history as a slaveholder, called for the statue to be banished, a push that gained significant momentum in the last year as the nation has broadly reconsidered public monuments that can be viewed as symbols of systemic racism. Now again, Thomas Jefferson statues are not about systemic racism. They're about the words of the Declaration of Independence that apply to all human beings. Okay, that's the whole point. The Declaration of Independence, the reason that Thomas Jefferson was a hypocrite in his own life is because he knew that he wasn't upholding his own standards. But that doesn't mean that the standards were wrong or that his articulation of the standards was bad. The articulation of the standards is what he was being held up to. On Monday, city officials voted unanimously to remove the statue of Thomas Jefferson from council chambers, but delayed a decision on where to put it. Presumably, we need to put up a statue of George Floyd, because that is more symbolic of the United States. A career criminal who was killed by a cop. That is much more symbolic of the United States. Now, you got to notice the logic here. Right? There's George Floyd statues that are now being erected in major cities around the United States. What are you building the statue of George Floyd to? George Floyd led a mess of a life. Okay, put aside how he died. His life was an absolute shambles. He was a mess. He was a career criminal who spent an awful lot of time in jail. He was high as a kite when he encountered the cops on the day of his fateful death. And you're building a statue to him. Why? Is the statue to all of the bad things he did in his life? Or is the statue supposed to be a commemoration of what happened to him? Right? So the philosophy of how you build a statue obviously applies to George Floyd, but it no longer applies to Thomas Jefferson. And if you're going to talk about somebody who did more good for the world, Thomas Jefferson or George Floyd, that is not a comparison. It is just not. One person was involved in the founding of a country. The other was a career criminal who unfortunately died at the hands of a cop. That is not, there is no comparison there. But we're a country that says yes on the statues of George Floyd, ixnay on the statues of Thomas Jefferson. Good luck to that country. Signe Nielsen, president of the Public Design Commission, which oversees art at city-owned properties, said, quote, "There are 700 pieces of art under our jurisdiction. We cannot make a rash decision that will set a precedent for the other 699 pieces of artwork that may also have challenges from people or other groups of people." The relocation of the statue, requested by the council's Black, Latino, and Asian caucus, was expected to be a fait accompli. Why the Asian? Was Thomas Jefferson like super anti-Asian? I didn't know about it. Okay, anyway. An agreement was already in place to relocate the statue to the New York Historical Society. A crate had been ordered to house the statue during the move. The unexpected delay angered some Black and Latino lawmakers. They're not super worried about the rising rates of murder in the city or the poverty and homelessness in the city of New York, but they are deeply worried that this statue is in a room with them because the statue is going to do something to them. It's like the end of Don Giovanni. It's going to emerge from hell to drag them down or something. There have been various attempts to remove the statue. 2 decades ago, a call to banish the statue gained attention, but it went nowhere because we weren't complete idiots 20 years ago. Adrienne Adams, councilwoman from Queens, said Jefferson embodies some of the most shameful parts of our country's history. Yeah, so does like all of history. I'm sorry to break it to Adrienne Adams, but all of human history is replete with suffering and evil. I mean, I'm sure her text messages are replete with some bad stuff. Like, are we really going to play this game? This is not a game that is worth playing. Opposition to removing the statue began to surface in recent days. A group of 17 historians sent a letter on Monday to the panel suggesting the statue stay at City Hall and simply be relocated to the governor's room, where it was originally housed for most of the 19th century. A Daily News editorial on Monday also questioned the move. Removal is a very simple solution that will erase the debate, said Raymond Lavertu, a historian at the Rothermere American Institute at the University of Oxford. Although Jefferson was massively flawed, he added, his ideas on equality should be grappled with daily. Well, yes. But again, Trump was right. Trump was correct. Okay, the left seems bound and determined to justify all of the worst expectations of the right. So the right's like, if you guys take down that Robert E. Lee statue, you'll probably go after Washington. And liberals like, nope, nah. And then the left's like, no, absolutely we will. Absolutely 100% we will. We already have the Public Design Commission voting to remove the Theodore Roosevelt statue at the entrance of the American Museum of Natural History, despite Theodore Roosevelt's contributions to that field. And they also have been talking about removing other statues as well. It's pretty incredible stuff. Really great. But you know what? This philosophy is alive and well inside the Biden administration. So Jennifer Granholm, who is the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, she was on national TV and she was talking about communist China. And she literally said, we don't have the moral authority to call it communist China. You have to understand, tearing down Jefferson is part and parcel of an idea about tearing down America and suggesting that America on the world stage has no place. This is part and parcel of what we talked about yesterday, the getting rid of the truth, justice, and the American way slogan from Superman. The left is intent on the notion that America is actually morally decrepit. There's something deeply wrong morally with the United States. America does not deserve to have a place on the world stage. We have to make America into utopia in order for us to be proud of ourselves. And the way you make America into utopia is by sinking into a socialist morass and being incredibly surrender-oriented in foreign policy. We're in a battle for the culture and for our values. Like and subscribe to help keep our videos on the front line of the fight and top of your feed.